First of all, I want you all to do like this and look up. Look up. Hold this for 10 seconds and wish that the person next to you showered this morning. So I was watching an excellent TED Talk a few weeks ago by a psychologist who figured out that if you do this, you actually gain confidence. It's called priming. It's the same thing that you see when runners, after they win a show, they do like this. But you can actually trick your brain to release the same emotions. And I think this is very important for what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about empowering you and actually believing in yourself. So my name is Jacob. I am a UWC graduate. And I'm also the co-founder of an organization called Global Minimum that works to empower youth and make them believe that they can actually carry out meaningful social change. I'm also a serial social entrepreneur. I've started many ventures. Global Minimum is just one of them. And some of those I'll talk about later in the workshop that I'm hosting afterwards. I spent the last 2 years living and working in Africa with youth empowerment and entrepreneurship on different things. And today I'd like to talk about the Global Minimum story. Global Minimum is a remarkable organization. This summer we have our 8th anniversary, and it was founded 8 years ago in 2006 in my dormitory in United World College, Red Cross Nordic. By myself, my roommate back in the time, David Senge, my second year Matthias Essman, and a friend of mine from elementary school, Jamie Appleseed. We were sitting like you guys in UWC and talking, especially in Norway. You're out in the middle of nowhere in a very rural area, and there's really not much you can do. I mean, you can hike, you can attend to cows, you can look at the beautiful weather when it's not raining, which it is all the time. So there really wasn't much we could do, and we felt really that we couldn't really make any change out there. So we figured out like what now? And we were all social entrepreneurs. We were doers. We were just tired of talking. David, my roommate, was from Sierra Leone. And in Sierra Leone, malaria is a pressing problem. So we devised a plan to cover an entire chiefdom with bed nets. Now, I'm really fortunate you all know everything about malaria after the excellent presentation before. It's very, very good timing, so I don't have to go through that. But malaria is a pressing problem. So we spent 3 years, every single summer, going to Sierra Leone, using all our pocket money, fundraising in the winters, going out, distributing an entire chiefdom with these mosquito tincture-treated bed nets that you see here. This is my colleague, Matthias. Every single summer, going around there, teaching people how to use them, why they're important. This was just after the civil war in Sierra Leone, so there's an enormous demand for these bed nets. And as you all know, bed nets are extremely cost-effective. They have a big impact, and they might not be as effective as these new things we just learned about, but this was, again, 8 years ago, so things have changed. In 3 years, we managed to distribute more than 10,000 nets and covered the entire chiefdom, which is a pretty remarkable achievement, we thought, given that we were just out of UWC, we were young, we were energetic, we wanted to actually create meaningful change. And as we all know, malaria is an enormous problem. So did our project have an impact? I went back alone in 2010 and spent a month motorbiking around, visiting people, interviewing them, had a translator, going into all the houses, checking out, did people have the nets over the bed, did they use them, asked about the response. And the response was an overwhelming yes. Every single person we spoke to, or not everyone, but 95% actually used their nets at night. So was this the right thing? Maybe. One evening just before I was going home, I was sitting talking to the speaker of the town, of the village we were in, and he said, "Jacob, thank you so much for bringing all these bed nets. What is the next thing what's the next thing Global Minimum is going to bring us? We really need blankets." And I think at that moment, I personally realized that while we on the one hand had managed to solve a problem on malaria, we had on the other hand created a bigger problem. We had instilled a spirit of dependency, where local people depended on foreign people, like myself, a white person coming from Denmark, coming in and solving their problems. We had killed self-efficacy. We had killed the entrepreneurial spirits. So, and this is something that really struck me, because this is not uncommon in emerging economies. Today, what often happens is there's an enormous dependency on foreign solutions, which kills this self-efficacy. It takes away the local spirit to actually drive through meaningful change. So what I realized is that you can ask 3 basic questions about development projects. That often is an indicator of whether this will be a long-term success. The first one is, what is the problem? Or who identifies the problem? Is the problem identified in a research institution far away where some guy with a computer sits and uses unreliable data so he can calculate his way to the problem? Or is it actually a problem that's coming from the ground up, this is our problem. Malaria, for instance, we know is a massive problem, but as we heard before, maybe these bed nets are better used for fishing if people are hungry. Secondly, who devises the solution? Is the solution something that local people say, this is what we believe will work? Or is it again someone from far away coming in and say, oh, I know what your problem is. You have to do this. In Ethiopia in the early millennia, there is a food crisis. A lot of people agree that hunger is a problem. We can all agree on that. But what is the solution? Now, the problem in Ethiopia in this particular case was not that there was a drought or a civil war or a crop failure. The problem arose from the fact that the years before the food crisis, there was excess production. Actually, there was so much food produced the year before that the food prices fell 80%, which meant that the farmers could not afford to buy crops for the next year, which caused the food crisis. Now, if you sit from the outside, you might think, oh, the solution is just food aid or better crops or GMO crops. But actually, the solution is a more efficient market system. That means that, or storage, where the farmers can store their crops. Finally, there's execution. Who actually carries out the project? Is this carried out by local external people coming in saying, we're going to build a school, we're going to build a well, we're going to build a medical clinic? Or is it solved by the local people who say, you know what, we want to build a school, we're going to run the school, we're going to fund the school, and we're going to ensure the school is also there in 10 years. Often projects come in, they build a school, they build a well, but there's no local ownership, so there's no maintenance. So the school doesn't have any teachers after 5 years, or there's no medical supplies, because these are not thought into the process. A second thing I learned while in Sierra Leone was through a pilot we did with the One Laptop per Child program. We distributed more than 100 laptops in the village in Sierra Leone. So while we were out during the day handing out mosquito nets, during the day, the kids were playing around with laptops. This was a remarkable experience. You give a kid a laptop, he's illiterate, he can't read, he's never seen a telephone before. And after 2 months, he knows how to use basic paint, he knows how to use Word, he can spell basic things. And I'm like, whoa, these kids are bloody smart. Where did this come from? So we figured out there's an enormous opportunity, untapped opportunity in these kids. Now, I believe that intelligence and ingenuity is equally distributed around the world, but that opportunities are not. We saw in these kids ourselves. Ourselves, a few years earlier, you received with the same drive to make meaningful change. The only difference is we were privileged. We had the opportunity. These kids had not. So we went back to the drawing board and figured out, what can we do? Inspired by something called MIT Ideas Challenges and Venture Cup at Copenhagen Business School, we decided to create an innovation competition. And in a competition where we would ask these kids to, first of all, figure out what they thought was a problem in their community. Second of all, propose an innovative solution to that problem. And third of all, come up with an action plan to how they were going to solve it. We started out in 2012 in Sierra Leone and visited schools all over the country and asked for these things. We asked them to go together in teams of 3 to 5, write a project proposal, submit it. Now, one of the finalists you know, Kelvin Doe, I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He was a finalist in 2012. What we do again is then we take the best proposals and give them seed funding. So not only do we say, oh, this is a great idea, this is wonderful, we also give them funding, up to $500 to make a prototype, up to $1,000 to scale the project. In addition, they get mentorship, so they get expert advisors to come in and help them. In Kenya, we hosted a camp where we took the 10 finalists, brought them into a camp, and had them go through step-by-step, here's an action plan. I remember I was hosting the camp, and I remember these kids came up to me like, oh, here's my proposal. And I'm like, great, here is $500, go do the project. They're like, what, you want me to go weld? I don't know how to use a welding machine. I'm like, I don't know how to use a welding machine either. You go do it. And 2 months later, they all came back with viable prototypes of different things that actually worked. It was remarkable. And I want to take you through 3 of the finalists from Innovate Kenya this year that I had a chance to work with. And they're similar in the fact that they're ingenious innovations, but also they're similar in the fact that when I first read their applications, I had no idea why these were smart. I'm not a genius, but fortunately I'm smart enough to work with smarter people. So I had Kenyan people work with me who told me these ideas are actually really good. Jacob, you're a dumb idiot. First one, so there's the bamboo coffins. Deforestation is a massive problem in Kenya, and so are expensive coffins. Like when someone dies, a coffin can often cost 2, 3, 4 months' salary. This often puts families into debt. These kids decided to build a coffin out of bamboo. Bamboo is a fast-growing material. It doesn't cause deforestation, and it's 4 times cheaper than normal coffins. But their real insight was not necessarily building a cheap coffin. Their real insight is, why do people buy expensive coffins? It's not like Africans can't build cheap coffins. I mean, this is a white man's stupid idea. So they devised the pledge form, which is sort of like an early will, where they go around and ask people to sign, I pledge to not put my family in debt and be buried in a bamboo coffin. Because they figured out it's a question of pride. People want to show respect for the people that pass away, but you also show respect by following the dead person's wish. If they wish to be buried in a bamboo coffin, you show respect by buying a cheaper coffin and preserving the environment. And this is something that I, as an outsider, had no understanding about. A second idea were cheap fire extinguishers made by these 5 girls. It should be mentioned that over half of the applications we got in Innovate Kenya 2013 were made by teams of girls. Also, half the finalists were teamed by girls, which is something that we often forget. Often we see innovators around the world, and they're all males. But these girls were as smart and often outcompeted all their peers, which I think is remarkable, and just shows that this is not gender specific. This is everyone can innovate and come up with innovative solutions. They took an old aerosol cans, the ones used for deodorants. They took citric acid and they took limestone and combined it into making a cheap fire extinguisher for the slums. Often in the slums or the low-income areas, fires is a big problem. There's faulty electric wiring, there's indoor cooking, and there isn't really any reliable way to turn out these fires. You can't just go and turn on the tap and put water on it. And normal fire extinguisher is super expensive. Again, a remarkable idea. They also found a way to produce citric acid out of rotten tomatoes. I don't know the chemistry out of this. I have no idea. I was just blown away. This is so cool. And now they want to scale it. The final thing I want to share is the story of Tom and green tar. This is probably the application that I understood the least. How many in here knows how to make charcoal? Just raise your hand if you know. So a few of you know. So charcoal is made by a process called pyrolysis, where you take wood and you burn it in a limited oxygen environment. The reason why you do this is because wood smokes a lot, and the combustion rate, the burn quality or the burn content of charcoal is higher than wood. So in an urban area, instead of transporting wood in, you transport charcoal in because you get more burn value out of the weight when you transport it in. Unfortunately, most charcoal in the world, at least the ones used for indoor cooking, is made out of firewood. And this is one of the most common usage in Kenya and much of Africa. Charcoal is the prime source of fuel for household cooking. These kids thought, okay, there are 2 problems here. Problem 1, we chop down forests to feed ourselves. Problem number 2, this charcoal smokes a lot, and you get respiratory ill diseases when you sit there and you cook and everything. So they decided to take agricultural waste materials, stuff that was just lying around rotting, like leftover from rice husks or sugarcane remains, and actually take these and turn them into charcoal. They did this extremely effectively, so effectively that they actually have a higher energy content, they smoke less, and all the input is for free. Just last week, they hired a guy, and they managed to sell their first batch of these charcoal. In 3 days, they made $63, which is also the monthly salary of the guy they hired. And now they're planning on scaling their production and covering all of Kenya with this green, renewable charcoal. Now, this is also an interesting concept because when I come in and see an emerging economy, I think of gas, I think of solar, I think of wind power. And those might be the solution in the long run. But what these kids realize is it needs an intermediary solution, something that can go directly into the systems that already exist, like people cooking in stoves using charcoal. This can be used by anyone already having a charcoal. They don't need to have electricity, don't need to have gas. And therefore, this is an ingenious social innovation that can create a lot of meaningful change right now in Kenya. Finally, what's next for us? Global Minimum with last year's winners of Rockefeller's Next Century Innovators Award. We're also complimentary mentors of what's called Clinton Global Initiative, which is a network for CEOs and NGOs where they come together and figure out how can we solve tomorrow's problems. Right now, we're building an innovation lab in Sierra Leone where kids can come in and have access to all the tools they want, all the mentions they want. So also the kids from Sierra Leone can have the same opportunities that I had going through the BC to figure out how can they make meaningful change. In Kenya, we're creating an incubator program for people like Tom and the teams from the fire extinguisher program, so they can not only come up with a good idea, but also scale it. What we often see is people have a good idea, they build a prototype, they put it on a shelf, and 5 years later, it's like this much dust. We don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that everyone has a good idea, has a chance of actually scaling it all over the world and create meaningful societal change. We're a very, very young organization. We're hoping to expand this product or this project to all over the world. I don't believe these projects are only applicable to Kenya or Sierra Leone or Cape Town where we're now at. We're in talks with cities in the US, in South America, in Africa, and in Europe about creating innovation challenges for everyone to create meaningful change. Thank you very much.